what's happening with the four different energy fields, first you have the electric field. So as alluded to a little earlier, you have these positive, negative charges surrounding the cell membrane. And as that charge gets sufficient enough, it triggers ion channels. It could be the sodium, potassium pump, and hormones, proteins, nutrients. And as we age, its ability to trigger that diminishes. So what happens is when you apply an electric field across the cell membrane, it actually triggers the cell membrane to open up or porate. It actually, in technical terms, it stresses the dielectric of the cell membrane to trigger holes that can be controlled through voltage and frequency and pulses to allow things to move in and out. So the effect that you get with the electric field is it makes the cell membrane more permeable to trigger these healthy cellular functions that include the ATP, the mitochondrial functions, sodium, potassium pump, hormones, proteins. Now, magnetic fields sort of do the same thing, but in a different way. So if I apply a magnetic field to a cell membrane, it's not going to stress the cell membrane to trigger those ion channels. But what it does do is it affects the ions that are surrounding the cell membrane. So as those ions are moving around, they're moving closer and further away from your cell membranes. As they move, like in food or diet or whatever it is, it's making the ions. As they move through the presence of a magnetic field, they pick up an electric charge like a generator would that increases that charge potential to again trigger the healthy cellular function. So the magnetic field works with the ion charges surrounding the cell membrane, whereas the electric field works with the membrane itself, but they both accomplish the effect of uptake the nutrients and detoxify. So thirdly, we produce the radio frequencies and harmonics. So that's a little bit different. So, there's a magnetic and electrical property on a cellular level, but there's also a vibrational component, specifically the magnetic resonance. So if you ever had an MRI, it's based off of a principle called magnetic resonance imaging or magnetic resonance. So the principle behind magnetic resonance is every cell, every molecule, every organ absorbs and emits a specific frequency unique to itself, and they can actually identify that based off the wave function. So when you get in an MRI, what they do is they produce a very uniform magnetic field, and then they bounce various radio waves, and how you emit and absorb those radio waves, the difference of those, they actually create an imaging. So that's how they could determine if it's what a healthy body would look versus an unhealthy body, or an unhealthy cell versus a unhealthy cell. It's not like it's what you're looking at is an image that the MRI makes. It's actually a mathematical representation of how these things absorb and emit energy or radio frequency. So what that means is every cell is like a one-band radio receiver tuned to a specific frequency. And if you generate that right radio station or frequency, you can transfer energy into it through sympathetic vibration. So if you ever had music class or physics class, and they do the experiment where they have two tuning forks in the exact same pitch, if I strike one and it starts to vibrate, it'll actually cause the other one to vibrate in your hand without having to strike it. Now, if I take another tuning fork of a different pitch and I do that, nothing would happen. Similarly, in a car radio, when I set my car radio at, say, 95.1, I only pick up one station and that's it. And what's actually happening is that if I set my car radio at 95.1, I'm literally vibrating the antenna at 95 megahertz, and I have a radio receiver that actually picks up that signal. Now, if I get really close to that radio tower, I get a really good signal, but I could actually change the radio station to actually pick up a radio station further away than where I'm sitting right next to. And it's because it's picking up these vibrations. So your cell's the same way. So if you generate the right radio station, you actually can transfer energy into the cell. So what the biocharger is doing is it's producing hundreds of thousands of different radio frequencies and harmonics that span the entirety of all of the magnetic resonance spectrum, as well as what they call the molecular band spectrum. So that entirety of that spectrum of frequencies is from zero to visible light. So when we go outside and we're in nature, those lightning discharges, as I mentioned earlier, there's hundreds of thousands of unique harmonics being generated with each lightning strike. So you get hundreds sets of hundreds of thousands of harmonics each second. So we're exposed to that natural energy, and we're actually designed. So our cells are actually designed to actually pick up all these different radio signals from the lightning discharge. So what we're doing, with the biocharger then is sort of mimicking that and adding the energy at all these different levels to actually help the body. And then finally, we have a light component. So light is a very important part of life. And what we're doing is we're producing about 1,000 different wavelengths in the infrared, far infrared, near infrared, visible light spectrum. So when you look at from a frequency spectrum, we're covering the entirety from zero to visible light. That's, so we're trying to mimic what that natural energy is outside.